"Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step away from the pool." The voice sliced through the humid Georgia air like a blade, sharp and certain, with the kind of authority that didn't ask, it demanded. Brielle Johnson turned her head slowly, her sunglasses slipping down the bridge of her nose just enough to catch the reflection of two uniformed officers approaching the pool gate. She didn't stand. Not yet. She didn't move at all. She just blinked and stared, her book still open in her lap, her iced water sweating on the plastic table beside her. Her body tensed, not because she was afraid, but because she recognized the look in the taller cop's eyes, the one that said he had already made up his mind about who she was, and more importantly, who she wasn't. "I'm sorry?" she asked, voice calm but clipped. The officer's boots hit the pavement with a heavy rhythm as he stepped inside the pool area, his partner trailing close behind. "We got a report of someone trespassing," he said, tapping his notepad. "We need to confirm you live here." She tilted her head slightly. "And what made me the suspect?" The shorter officer's lip twitched, just slightly. "You matched the description." Of course she did. But relaxing alone. That was all it ever took. "I live in Unit 308C, Brielle said evenly, reaching slowly for her bag. "My key card and ID are right here. Would you like to see them?" "Go ahead," the taller one said, watching her every movement like she was about to pull a weapon instead of a wallet. As she handed over the items, her hands steady, her chest burned with a quiet fury. Not because it was happening, but because it had happened before, and she knew it would happen again. This wasn't about her ID. This wasn't about a pool policy. This was about presence. Her presence. In a space they didn't expect her to occupy. The taller officer, his badge red Officer Braxton, studied her ID as if he expected it to peel away and reveal something else underneath. The younger one, Officer Miller, held the blue plastic key card up to the sunlight like it might glow if it were real. Brielle said nothing. She'd learned that when you're black and in a confrontation with police, silence could be more disarming than compliance. You don't blink too fast. You don't speak too slow. You let them make the next move. "Brielle Johnson," Braxton read aloud, dragging out the syllables like they were foreign. "Unit 308C. "That's correct." Miller gave a little scoff under his breath and scribbled something onto his notepad. "You live here alone?" "I live with my cousin. She works nights at the hospital." Braxton's eyes drifted past her to the pool chairs, to her towel, her bag, the closed book in her lap. "And what exactly are you doing here today?" Brielle looked him dead in the eyes. "I'm sitting." There was a pause. A long, dragging silence. One of those moments where they expected her to explain more, to make it easier for them to believe she belonged. She didn't. "You here often?" Miller asked, cocking his head like he was studying wildlife. "Every Sunday. Same chair. Same playlist. Same peace and quiet, until today." Braxton's fingers tapped the edge of her license. "We're not accusing you of anything, Miss Johnson. We're just following up on a complaint." "Right," she said. "And that complaint said what exactly?" He hesitated just for a second. "Unfamiliar woman at the pool. Possibly loitering. Caller said you looked out of place." Brielle felt it hit, the phrase, "out of place." It wasn't the first time it had been used. Not in this way. Not about her. But the meaning behind it never changed. She wasn't part of the background here. She didn't fit the default image of what safe looked like. "And did the caller mention that this unfamiliar woman was doing anything threatening?" she asked. "No. Just that they didn't recognize you and weren't sure you lived here." She nodded slowly. "So someone saw a black woman at the pool and assumed I was breaking in?" Braxton cleared his throat. "We don't know who made the call. But you showed up. Guns on hips. Ready to interrogate me." Neither of them responded. Across the courtyard, a glass door slid open. A voice, sharp, female, and familiar, called out from a third-floor balcony. "She lives here." All three turned. A woman in a yellow tank top leaned over her railing, her phone in hand. "That's Brielle Johnson. She moved in 2 months ago. I've seen her walk her dog every morning at 7. She's here all the time." Brielle recognized her, Marcy Vireil. Lived in 310A. They weren't close, but they'd shared polite nods in the mailroom, traded stories about parking issues. Marcy's voice didn't waver. You should be asking who called this in, not bothering her. For the first time, Braxton shifted uncomfortably. He handed back the ID and key card with a stiff nod. Appreciate your cooperation, ma'am. But Brielle didn't reach for them immediately. She looked both men in the eye. I pay rent here. I follow the rules. I haven't made a single complaint, not even about the noisy unit that throws parties on Thursdays. And still, this is what I get. Look, Miller started, this isn't personal. It is when it keeps happening, she said. They had no response to that. None worth saying out loud. We'll let you get back to your day, Braxton offered, already walking backward toward the gate. Miller followed, glancing over his shoulder once more before the latch clicked behind them. Only when the SUV pulled away did Brielle let her shoulders drop. But the weight didn't lift. If anything, it settled deeper in her chest. The sun still blazed overhead. The children's laughter had stopped. She hadn't noticed when the family left the pool. The silence around her felt louder than it should. She sat still for several minutes, her book forgotten, the condensation from her thermos trailing across the table. Her peace had been ruptured. Not by noise or confrontation, but by something heavier, something that came wrapped in politeness and, just doing our job, smiles. Marcy remained at her balcony. After a few seconds, she held up her phone and gave a subtle nod before stepping back inside. She'd recorded it. Brielle didn't know whether to feel grateful or ashamed that she'd needed a witness at all. When she finally stood, her legs felt tight, her body tense in places that had once been soft. She dried off with the corner of her towel, packed her bag, and walked the familiar path back to her townhouse. Every step echoed louder than it should have. The hedges she passed looked the same. The faded, no loud music sign stood crooked as always. The breeze still rustled the tree branches overhead. But the space around her no longer felt neutral. It felt like it had been watched. Brielle didn't unpack her pool bag when she got home. She set it gently by the door, as if opening it might let something spill out she wasn't ready to confront. The house was cool, dim, and quiet, exactly how she left it, but it no longer felt like a sanctuary. The air conditioning whispered from the vents, but her skin still burned. Her hands trembled slightly, so she pressed them to her thighs and sat at the edge of her couch. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was accusatory. She could still hear the way Officer Braxton said her name, like it was a riddle he hadn't quite solved. She could still feel Officer Miller's eyes scanning her body, not with desire, but with suspicion, like her existence was a code he was trained to decode, and something just didn't add up. She leaned forward and cradled her face in both palms. The clock on the wall ticked steadily. Her iced water had gone warm. Her mouth was dry. But none of it moved her. This wasn't new. That's what made it worse. The incident at the pool hadn't been the first time her right to exist comfortably had been interrogated. It wasn't even the most blatant. Just the latest in a string of humiliations, each one small enough to excuse in isolation, but together they formed a noose of polite hostility that never loosened. She remembered the first week she moved in. A man from 3 doors down had knocked on her unit at dusk, holding a mis-delivered Amazon box. His smile had been tight, his gaze overly focused. Before he handed it over, he asked if she was just visiting or helping out with the cleaning. The words had tumbled out casually, like assumptions tossed onto a conversational fire, waiting to see if they'd burn. She had smiled then, too tired to correct him, too new to want trouble. She had thanked him, closed the door, and stood behind it for several minutes, gripping the cardboard box like a shield. There had been more after that. Like the HAA notice slipped under her door the day after she hosted her cousin's birthday dinner. It wasn't loud. Just 5 friends, a Bluetooth speaker, and a lemon cake. The notice read, "We remind all residents to adhere to community noise policies. Please avoid disruptive gatherings or unregistered guests." The letter didn't mention her name. It didn't need to. Or the woman who clutched her purse tighter when Brielle walked by the mailbox in gym clothes. Or the neighbor who smiled with her mouth but locked eyes with something behind Brielle, as if scanning for someone more trustworthy to hand the conversation off to. It was all so familiar. And familiarity, in this case, wasn't comforting, it was exhausting. She stood slowly and went to the kitchen, opened the fridge, closed it again. Her appetite had vanished somewhere between the deep end and the police SUV. She grabbed her phone and unlocked it. There were no missed calls. Just one text from her cousin Camille, which says, "Hey Brielle, I am almost done with the shift. Want me to pick up something?" Brielle stared at the screen, thumb hovering. For a moment, she considered not saying anything. She had kept quiet before. Let it roll off her back. Buried it under the ever-growing pile of not worth the energy. But today, that pile had collapsed. Something inside her felt unsettled, like the part of her that knew how to pretend had been cracked open too wide to close. Got stopped by cops at the pool. Said someone reported me for looking out of place. I'm fine. But I'm not fine. Don't bring food. Just come home. She hit send, then dropped the phone beside the sink and leaned on the counter. Her reflection in the microwave door looked like someone else. Someone older, worn. A soft knock startled her. She straightened, unsure whether to expect more cops or another envelope slipped under the door. It wasn't either. Through the peephole, she saw Marcy from the balcony. Her curls were damp, and she wore a t-shirt with faded cartoon characters on it and no makeup. She looked like someone who had come straight from a shower with a mission. Brielle opened the door halfway. "Hey," Marcy said quietly. I thought I should check in. That was messed up back there." "Yeah," Brielle said, her voice dry. "It was. I filmed it," Marcy added. "I know I didn't ask, but it didn't feel right to just watch." "You filmed it?" "Yeah. I've seen enough of those encounters to know how they can go. I figured a camera might make a difference." Brielle stepped back slightly and opened the door wider. "You want to come in?" Marcy nodded. "If you're okay with that." Inside, Brielle gestured toward the couch, and Marcy sat, pulling her phone from her pocket. She opened the video and passed it over. The footage wasn't long. A minute, maybe two. The quality was shaky, but the audio was clear. Brielle watched herself in third person. Watched the stiffness in her shoulders. The way she kept her hands visible. The way Braxton stepped too close. The condescension in Miller's voice when he asked if she lived alone. She didn't realize how composed she had seemed. On the inside, she was shaking. "Can you send it to me?" she asked when it ended. Marcy nodded. "Already did. It's in your inbox." Brielle's chest tightened. Not from fear, but something close to resolve. "Thank you," she said, genuinely. Not everyone would have done that. Marcy leaned forward, resting her arms on her knees. "I can't imagine what it feels like to have to prove you belong somewhere you already live. But I can be the kind of neighbor who doesn't pretend it didn't happen." That landed softly. In a way Brielle didn't expect. Camille came home an hour later, still in scrubs, hair tied up and eyes heavy with fatigue. When she walked in and saw Brielle and Marcy seated in silence, her brow furrowed. "You okay?" she asked Brielle. Brielle stood and walked to her. "No. But I'm getting there." She told her everything. The call. The questions. The tone. The assumptions. Camille didn't cry. She didn't scream. But her jaw clenched and her shoulders tensed, like she had to physically hold her rage in place. "They're gonna keep doing this," she said. "Unless something changes." Brielle nodded. "Then maybe it's time we make that change." She pulled out her laptop and opened her email. The screen glowed, and her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She started writing. Not to vent or yell but to document. She opened a new folder called Pool Incident, August 10th, and dragged Marcy's video into it. She added screenshots of her ID, photos of her mailbox with her nameplate, a copy of her lease agreement. She dug out the previous notices from the HO, scanned them, and saved them, too. She was building something. She didn't know what yet. But she knew it needed to start here. Because the pool wasn't the first time. And if she stayed silent, it damn sure wouldn't be the last. The morning after the pool incident, Brielle stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. To anyone else, she probably looked the same, black linen blouse tucked into gray slacks, minimal makeup, soft gloss on her lips, gold hoops that framed her face just enough. But to her, something had shifted. The reflection staring back at her wasn't just her face, it was the residue of being marked. Not physically, not outwardly, but in that invisible way that stays with you. The kind that forces you to question if the world sees you as a person or a pattern, a name or a warning. She adjusted her necklace, checked the time, and grabbed her laptop bag. As she opened the door, she paused. Then stepped back inside and placed Marcy's printed screenshot, an image of the two officers standing over her pool chair, into the folder she'd started the night before. She wasn't sure why she felt the need to print it. Maybe because she'd learned that digital evidence had a way of disappearing when it was most needed. Outside, the courtyard was quiet. Too quiet. The usual morning bustle, the sound of car engines starting, neighbors rushing out with coffee cups and half-zipped bags, was subdued, replaced by an awareness that made her skin itch. As she approached the parking lot, she noticed it. Mr. Irwin. The man with the gold Buick and the American flag bumper sticker. He was standing on his porch with a mug in hand, not sipping, just watching. His eyes trailed her movements, not with warmth or curiosity, but with that low-grade suspicion that had no cause and yet always found a home. She gave a tight nod. He didn't return it. Across the lot, Mrs. Cunningham was watering her plants again, though the soil looked as damp as it had the night before. She smiled, but the kind that didn't touch her eyes. Something had spread. Brielle reached her car, opened the door, and slid inside. Before starting the engine, she sat with her hand on the ignition, staring straight ahead. Someone had talked. She hadn't posted anything publicly. She hadn't sent out a newsletter or knocked on doors. But the story was moving. Whispered between screen doors, passed during dog walks, typed into the neighborhood Facebook group where the same people who complimented her on her patio plants now debated whether she was overreacting. By the time she arrived at her office, the fog hadn't lifted. Her manager, Serena, greeted her with her usual brittle smile, but the words felt thinner. "How was your weekend?" Brielle hesitated. "Eventful." She didn't elaborate. Serena didn't ask. In the break room, she heard two coworkers whispering, something about police and wrong identity, before they lowered their voices as she entered. She filled her mug with coffee and walked out without acknowledging either of them. But the seed had been planted. Even here, miles from the pool, the ripples had reached the edges. That evening, when she pulled into her complex, a folded white envelope was wedged into the frame of her front door. No stamp. No return address. Just her name, in large block letters. She closed the door behind her before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typed. "You're drawing too much attention to yourself. People are starting to feel uncomfortable. Maybe you should stop before you ruin it for everyone." No signature. No explanation. Just that. Brielle stood still, the letter trembling in her hand. She read it again, then folded it once, twice, and placed it next to the HOA noise warning she'd received last month. She didn't cry. She didn't scream. She sat at her desk and opened her laptop. The folder titled Pool Incident, August 10th, had grown. She added a new subfolder and labeled it Anonymous Threats. Inside it, she saved a scanned image of the note. She wasn't being paranoid. She wasn't imagining things. They were watching her now. Not because she'd done anything wrong, but because she had dared to make them see something they didn't want to admit was there. Later that night, Camille sat beside her on the balcony. A gentle breeze stirred the wind chimes hanging from the neighbor's unit. They shared a silence that didn't feel tense, just full. Camille broke it. "You gonna let this make you small?" Brielle turned to her cousin. "I don't know." That's an honest answer. Camille sipped her ginger beer and exhaled. "You remember freshman year when that professor made me stay after class to explain why I got a higher grade than the boy sitting next to me? Mr. Know-It-All Greg? Brielle. That's the one." They both laughed quietly, the kind that softened the moment without ignoring its weight. "Back then," Camille said, "I thought staying quiet made me safe. But it didn't. It just made him bolder. He did it again the next semester to someone else. And by then it was harder to stop." Brielle leaned back against the wooden chair, her fingers wrapped around the metal arms like she was anchoring herself in place. "I never wanted to be anyone's example," she said. "Too late for that now," Camille replied. "You already are. So the question is, what are you gonna do with it?" The next morning, Brielle sent an email to the HOA. She CC'd Camille, Marcy, and 3 other residents she trusted. In it, she detailed the pool incident, attached the video, and politely demanded an official response. 2 hours later, she got a reply. It was cold. "We take all reports seriously. We are reviewing the matter and will follow up once we have completed our internal assessment. We appreciate your patience." No apology, no accountability. Just process. But something about that response lit a fire in Brielle's chest. Because now it wasn't just about what had happened at the pool. It was about what had been happening long before she ever dipped her toes in the water. They wanted her silent. They wanted her small. Instead, she pressed forward, attached the letter she'd received anonymously, and sent it to a local community advocacy group she'd followed for years but never contacted. She didn't send it anonymously. She signed her name at the bottom. Brielle Johnson. Copper Oaks Townhomes. Unit 308C. Let them see her. Let them know she wasn't going anywhere. By Thursday afternoon, Brielle could feel the shift, not just in whispers or side glances, but in posture, in tone, in the way certain neighbors started locking eyes for a second too long, then looking away just before it became a confrontation. The HOA hadn't followed up. The police hadn't called. But people were talking. That morning, the post appeared on the neighborhood Facebook group. A blurry image of her, seated at the pool, officers looming, circulated with the caption, "Is this really the image we want to project to the outside world?" The comment thread spiraled in under an hour. Some called it an overreaction. Others defended her, cautiously. A few, masked in vague concern, wondered aloud if some people were trying to bring politics into a peaceful neighborhood. Brielle didn't comment. She didn't defend herself. She watched. And what she saw was a pattern she'd recognized before, but this time it wore new faces, carried new phrases. The language wasn't aggressive. It was strategic. Sanitized. Words like civility, decorum, and community safety littered the thread like polite barricades to deeper truth. Underneath them, she saw what no one wanted to say plainly. They were uncomfortable being made to look at themselves. That evening, she sat at the dining table with her laptop open and 3 folders displayed on her desktop. One was the original pool incident. The second held screenshots of HOA communications going back to her move-in date. The third was titled simply, Pattern. Inside that last folder, she had begun documenting moments that, for years, had floated alone in her memory, disconnected but never forgotten. She was connecting them now. There was the letter her friend Danielle received when she lived across town in West Haven, an anonymous warning after she hosted a Juneteenth cookout in her backyard. Brielle had kept a copy after Danielle moved out 6 months later. There was the image her old coworker, Maya, had sent her, her car keyed with the word, loud, scratched across the door after she filed a complaint about the neighbor's late-night leaf blower. And there was the video of a man being followed by a neighbor on foot for nearly 2 blocks. That man was her cousin's fiancé. He had only been jogging. The neighbor had claimed he looked lost. Brielle wasn't collecting stories anymore. She was building a case. The neighborhood didn't have an isolated incident. It had a culture. One that whispered bias behind bylaws. One that policed presence under the disguise of concern. One that smiled to your face while dialing 911 behind the curtains. She stared at the screen until the lines blurred. Then her inbox pinged. It was a response from Justice in Place, the community advocacy group she had emailed 2 days earlier. Subject: We believe you. Hi Brielle. Thank you for reaching out and for the courage it took to put your name to this. We've reviewed the video and your documentation. We believe your story has broader implications for how HOAs and local law enforcement interact, especially in racially mixed communities. We'd like to offer media support, legal referral, and help you coordinate a local forum to raise these issues directly with your community. If you're open to it, we'd like to start with a conversation this weekend. Aisha Ramsey. Lead organizer, Justice in Place. Brielle stared at the email for a full minute. She wasn't sure if what she felt was relief or fear. Because what came next wouldn't be about what happened to her alone. It would be about the structure she had cracked open, the termites now exposed to light. Camille walked in just as Brielle was shutting her laptop. "You look like you just read your own obituary," Camille said, dropping her bag on the floor. Brielle leaned back in her chair. "Justice in place wants to help. Media support. Legal advice. Even a community forum." Camille didn't blink. "You gonna do it?" "I don't know what I'm doing," Brielle confessed. "I just know I'm tired of pretending this place is what it claims to be." Camille poured herself a glass of water, her silence saying more than any words. She sat down across from her cousin, elbows on the table. "I don't think anyone ever asks to be the one who pushes the needle," she said. "But sometimes the needle finds you anyway." Brielle cracked a tired smile. "You sound like our Aunt Renee." She was right about most things. Outside, the sky had gone deep blue, the kind that made streetlights flicker awake one by one like nervous sentinels. The courtyard was quiet again. Too quiet. Later that night, Brielle received a text from Marcy. Marcy said, "Just a heads up. There's another post. HOA board is meeting tomorrow. Behind closed doors. No resident invite." Brielle replied, "Of course they are." Marcy typed, "I can try to get someone to leak what's said. Or I can just cause a scene in the hallway." Brielle answered, "Tempting. Don't get arrested for me." Marcy finally replied, "Worth it." Brielle smiled at the screen. The next morning, a printed flyer was taped to her door. Emergency HOA Assembly, Saturday at 10 a.m. Residents Only Clubhouse Lounge. The timing wasn't subtle. Neither was the headline on Metro Journal Digital that morning. "Woman harassed by police at neighborhood pool. Video suggests bias over safety." The article quoted her name, the advocacy group, even linked to the video Marcy had taken. The comments started to pour in again. This time, not just from neighbors, but from strangers. Supportive, angry, curious, dismissive. Some demanded accountability. Others questioned her intentions. But this time, Brielle didn't feel like a lone voice. At noon, she walked past the leasing office. The woman behind the desk glanced up, then quickly looked back down. A man at the vending machine pretended to check the label on a water bottle he'd already purchased. She was being seen. Just not the way she used to be. This time, they saw her fully. And they didn't know what to do with that. Back at home, she drafted her statement for the upcoming HOA meeting. It wasn't a rant. It wasn't an accusation. It was a truth laid bare, with timestamps, receipts, history. The closing line took her the longest. She finally typed, "This neighborhood doesn't just have a noise problem or a trash bin policy issue. It has a pattern of treating black presence as a disruption. I am not a disruption. I am a resident. And I won't apologize for taking up space." When she hit save, she didn't feel victorious. She felt ready. Saturday came too fast. Brielle barely slept the night before. Not because she was afraid, but because her mind wouldn't stop rehearsing every scenario. What if they denied everything? What if they turned it on her? What if she stood in that room full of tension and tight smiles, and not one person looked her in the eye? She'd ironed her clothes the night before, a soft navy blouse and charcoal slacks, simple, strong. She wanted to walk in looking like the woman they had already misjudged. The one they had tried to reduce to a misunderstanding, to a concern, to a disruption. No earrings. No distractions. Just her, unfiltered. At 9:52 a.m., she and Camille stepped out of their unit and made the short walk to the clubhouse. The lounge was already half full. Residents milled about with complimentary coffee cups, pretending they were just there for monthly maintenance updates and landscaping updates. But no one asked about shrubs this time. The folding chairs were arranged in a semicircle. The HOA board sat behind a plastic table draped in a beige tablecloth with a decorative Copper Oaks Community banner pinned to the front. Trevor Lang, the HOA president, sat in the middle, sipping something from a travel mug and wearing a face that said he'd rather be anywhere else. When Brielle entered, the quiet changed. Not completely. Just a small shift in gravity. A few people turned, some nodded politely, Others stared, blinking too slow. Camille walked beside her, unbothered, like a shield that didn't need to speak. Marcy was already there, seated 2 rows from the front, her hands folded over a manila folder. She gave Brielle a tight smile and a nod. Next to her sat Mr. Fry, retired, white, soft-spoken, and one of the only neighbors who had texted Brielle the day after the incident with a simple message. Saw everything. Got your back. At 10:01, Trevor tapped the microphone once. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending on such short notice. We've called this emergency session to address recent events in the neighborhood that have drawn significant attention and concern. I'll keep this brief. You always do, muttered someone in the back. A few people chuckled nervously. Trevor cleared his throat. We've all seen the video. We've all read the comments. And I want to begin by stating that no resident should feel unwelcome in their own community. Brielle stared straight ahead. No black resident. Not what happened was wrong. Just vague comfort words soaked in PR. As such, he continued, we're opening the floor today to any resident who wishes to speak. We ask that everyone remain respectful, civil, and concise. Brielle stood before anyone else could. She walked slowly to the center of the room and turned to face them, not just the board, but the people. The ones who had watched. The ones who had whispered. The ones who had read the headlines and still wondered if maybe she had exaggerated. First, she began, her voice clear, I want to thank the few of you who reached out, who asked how I was doing, who didn't hide behind community forums or anonymous notes. The tension in the room tightened. I'm not here to accuse anyone of being racist outright. That would be too easy. What I'm here to do is tell the truth about a culture that you've all been part of, actively or silently. Someone shifted uncomfortably in their seat. Another sipped their coffee like it might save them from being implicated. I was approached by police while reading a book at our community pool. I was asked to prove I lived here. I showed ID. I showed my key card. It wasn't enough. They asked to see my unit. They questioned whether I lived alone. All because someone thought I didn't look like I belonged. Her voice didn't crack. It rose. I submitted a complaint. I submitted evidence. I sent emails. And your response, she said, locking eyes with Trevor, was vague, cold, and corporate. Trevor shifted in his seat but said nothing. This didn't start at the pool, she continued. This started the day I moved in and someone asked if I was the cleaning help. It started with the noise complaints that only ever seemed to show up at black residents' doors. It started when people started calling my presence a problem, without ever speaking to me. A hush fell over the room. She let it sit there. I've lived here. Paid dues. Followed rules. Stayed quiet. And for what? So I could be told I make people uncomfortable simply for existing outside my door. She paused, eyes sweeping the room. Let them say it to my face then. Don't hide behind Facebook comments or anonymous letters. If my presence makes you uncomfortable, then own that discomfort. Because I'm not moving. I'm not hiding. And I will not be silent to protect anyone's illusion of peace. The silence now was heavier. No one coughed. No one sipped. Just breath and awareness. Trevor leaned forward, his voice small. Ms. Johnson. That's all I have, she said, cutting him off. And she walked back to her seat, each step slow, deliberate, a reclaiming of space she no longer intended to apologize for. From the back, Mr. Fry raised his hand. I'd like to speak, he said. His voice was quiet but steady. I've lived here 22 years. Seen 3 different management companies. 5 boards. And never, not once, have I seen this neighborhood hold itself accountable like this. He looked around. That video made me sick. Not because it shocked me, but because it didn't. We've seen it in the news. We shake our heads. But when it happens in our own backyard, we call it a misunderstanding. Several people looked away. I support Brielle, he said. And if this board doesn't start making actual changes, not just statements, then I'll use every contact I have in the city to make sure this doesn't get swept under the rug. That was the moment it shifted. Because after Mr. Fry, Marcy stood up. Then a younger woman in scrubs. Then an elderly black man who had never spoken at a meeting before. The room started to feel different. Not fixed, but braver. Trevor nodded stiffly and scribbled something on a notepad. We will discuss proposals in the coming weeks. A review of resident reporting procedures. Possibly a bias training session. More transparency around enforcement policies. Still vague. But no one clapped. Brielle didn't need them to. Because as the meeting ended and people filtered out, several stopped beside her. Not all. But enough. They didn't say much. Just nods. Gentle thank you. A hand on the shoulder. One woman whispered, I'm sorry. I've been quiet too long. Camille slipped her arm through Brielle's and whispered, let them watch now. But this time, make sure they see you. And Brielle smiled, not because it was over, but because she had decided it wouldn't be hidden anymore. Sunday mornings in Copper Oaks used to be invisible. Sprinklers ticked on like clockwork. A jogger or two passed with earbuds in, nodding to nobody in particular. Porch lights blinked off. And by 10, the neighborhood disappeared into quiet routines, laundry, coffee, silent stares through screen doors. But not this Sunday. Because this time, everyone saw Brielle. She didn't do anything special. She wore her faded Northeast State sweatshirt, leggings, and her hair tied in a loose puff at the top of her head. She didn't wave at every neighbor or smile at every porch. She just walked Bruno, her cousin's gentle pit mix, around the block like she always did. Only now, the glances weren't subtle. Mrs. Carson, who usually busied herself with watering plants that didn't need water, straightened her back as Brielle passed and gave a nod far too formal for someone she'd lived near for 2 months. Mr. Irwin, the same man who had once questioned whether Brielle was just visiting, opened his door when he heard her dog tags jingle by, then quickly closed it when she looked up. And then there was the group by the leasing office, 3 men from the HOA board. One of them, glasses perched on his forehead like a crown, muttered something under his breath just loud enough for his friend to chuckle. Brielle didn't stop walking. She had spent too many years decoding those half-phrases, the tilted heads, the long pauses. She used to wonder if she was imagining it. Now she knew better. And this time, the guessing was over. They saw her now. Not because she had changed, but because she refused to keep shrinking. Back at her unit, Camille was sitting on the balcony with a bowl of cereal and her legs tucked under a blanket. People are rattled, she said, watching the complex from above like a hawk on post. Brielle unclipped Bruno's leash. Good. I think it's finally sinking in that you're not going to let this go. Brielle sipped from her mug of lemon tea and exhaled. Because I'm not. She pulled out her phone and opened the group chat titled Forum 308C, a growing circle of residents who had joined forces since the HOA meeting. The messages had doubled overnight. Marcy said, met with Aisha from Justice in Place. They're drafting a formal recommendation for HOA bias prevention protocols. Tay said, got 2 neighbors willing to speak up at the next public meeting. 1 white, 1 Asian. Both work in legal aid. Said they'd been watching how things unfolded and didn't like it. Taness said, I'm in. Whatever you need. This place needs a reset. It was happening. Slowly. Imperfectly. But it was happening. Not everyone was thrilled. Later that afternoon, Brielle found another envelope. This one tucked under her windshield wiper, folded in quarters, written in the same tight handwriting as the last one. Hope you're enjoying the spotlight. Don't forget, this community remembers who stirs the pot. This time, Brielle didn't save it. She snapped a photo, emailed it to Aisha, then dropped it directly into the recycling bin. That evening her phone rang. It was a number she didn't recognize, but it had a local area code. Hello. Ms. Johnson, the voice asked, calm, professional. This is Deputy Chief Renee Harwood with the Marietta Police Department. I'd like to schedule a time to meet with you in person, if you're willing. Brielle stood still in her kitchen. What's this regarding? We've reviewed the footage. The initial officer response, body cam footage, and resident statements. Internal Affairs is preparing a report. But I'd prefer to speak to you directly before we finalize it. She paused, then said, I'll make time. Would Tuesday afternoon work? Yes. They agreed on a time and location. As Brielle ended the call, Camille appeared from the hallway. "Was that who I think it was?" "Deputy Chief," Brielle said, placing the phone on the counter like it carried weight. "They want to meet. Review everything. You ready for that?" Brielle didn't answer right away. She walked to the window instead, looking out at the pool. The same chair was still there, near the deep end. Same cracked tile. Same plastic table. But everything was different now. "I don't know if I'm ready," she said finally. "But I know I'm done asking permission to speak." On Tuesday, she wore all black. Not to mourn. To be clear. Black trousers. Black blazer. Hair pulled back with a single silver pin. No earrings. Just stillness and steel. When she walked into the community center where the meeting was held, the deputy chief rose to greet her. A middle-aged black woman with short natural curls. She extended her hand firmly. "Ms. Johnson. Thank you for coming." They sat in a private conference room. Aisha from Justice in Place joined remotely on a call, her voice steady through the speakerphone. The conversation was direct. Brielle laid out everything. The pool incident, the hesitation from the officers, the anonymous letters, the quiet patterns of being followed, questioned, disbelieved. She didn't stutter. She didn't soften her voice. Deputy Chief Harwood listened closely, taking notes by hand, nodding at key moments. "I reviewed the body cam footage myself," she said at one point. "The officer's approach was casual, but the tone changed the moment they saw you. That's consistent with racial bias, implicit or otherwise. Are they facing consequences?" Brielle. Harwood folded her hands. "Officer Braxton has been issued a formal warning and placed on bias awareness training. Officer Miller is on administrative leave while we review a separate complaint, unrelated to your case, but with similar undertones." It wasn't enough. But it was something. "Would you be willing to join our Citizen Advisory Committee?" Harwood asked. "We're rebuilding it, and the night before the community forum, the sky broke open with rain. It wasn't the soft kind that whispers on rooftops, it was the kind that seemed to wash everything raw. Thunder rolled across the city like a warning, and Brielle watched from her balcony as the downpour blanketed copper oaks in silver sheets. Her tea went cold beside her, forgotten. Her thoughts wandered between nerves and resolve. It had been nearly 4 weeks since the day the officers stood at her pool chair asking if she belonged. For weeks since she answered with a quiet fire they didn't expect. For weeks since a neighborhood pretended to look away but was now being forced to look in. Her email inbox had doubled in size. She'd received invitations to speak, offers to write, even a message from a high school senior in Tennessee who said watching her stand up made her feel less invisible. Camille had cried reading that one. But it wasn't the attention that made the difference. It was the accountability. Justice in Place hadn't just helped her send a letter. They helped her start a movement. After Deputy Chief Harwood's meeting, the City Council launched an initiative to audit residential policing complaints across 3 districts, starting with neighborhoods managed by HOAs. Harwood herself invited Brielle to review training materials used in bias protocol courses for first responders. And at Copper Oaks, the cracks had widened into something honest. The HOA board had been forced to open records. Policies were under review. The language in community complaints was being rewritten from scratch, with community input. No more phrases like, "suspicious person near pool." No more anonymity for repeat callers without consequence. Even the anonymous notes had stopped. Not because the hate had vanished, but because silence was no longer safe for it. People were watching now, and not just from balconies. The morning of the forum, Brielle walked past the pool. It looked the same. Still had that faded, "No diving" sign. Still had the cracked blue tile near the drain. But it no longer felt like neutral ground. It felt claimed. A folding table had been set up near the clubhouse entrance with clipboards, flyers, and a banner that read, "Community belongs to everyone." Marcy waved her over with a smile. "Nervous?" Brielle nodded. "Terrified." "Good," Marcy said, handing her a microphone. "Means you care." Inside, nearly 60 people filled the chairs. Some she recognized, Mrs. Shipley from the HO board, now off the board and seated with a pen in hand. Mr. Fry in his usual cardigan. Marcy's teenage daughter, holding a notebook with folded corners. Even Mr. Irwin, the same man who had once glared at her mailbox like it didn't belong, sat in the back with his arms crossed but his eyes forward. And at the front, standing with quiet confidence, was Aisha from Justice in Place. She welcomed everyone with grace and control, her voice rising just enough to be heard clearly, her presence like a lighthouse. "We are here," Aisha said, "because silence has never kept a community safe. It has only kept it convenient, for some. Today is not about blame. It is about beginning." Brielle's turn came after 3 other speakers. One shared how her child had been followed home by a neighbor for walking too slowly. Another, a white father, confessed that he used to worry when unfamiliar faces appeared in the park and only recently asked himself why. When Brielle stepped forward, the microphone didn't shake in her hands. She thought it might, but it didn't. "I've lived here for 4 months, she began. "That's it. Just 4. She paused. "In that time, I've been approached by police for sitting by the pool. I've been warned, indirectly and directly, that I made people uncomfortable simply by being visible. And I've been asked more than once to stay quiet, for the sake of peace." She looked at the crowd, her voice steady. "But peace without truth isn't peace. It's a muzzle. And I won't wear it anymore." There were no interruptions. Just breath. Just silence that listened. "When I moved here, I thought blending in would be enough. I thought smiling and nodding and keeping to myself would let me exist without trouble. But the trouble wasn't in me. It was in the expectations placed on me, expectations to stay silent when disrespected, to be grateful for basic rights, to apologize for taking up space." She looked at the pool through the window behind them. This neighborhood has changed. Maybe not entirely. Maybe not forever. But it has changed. Because someone saw something and said it out loud. Because someone else recorded it. Because a few others didn't let it die quietly. And because more of us decided that being uncomfortable for a moment was better than being complicit for a lifetime. She let that hang. "This isn't about me anymore. It belongs to all of us now." Applause started softly. Then rose. Not because she asked for it. Not because she needed it. But because it had to come from them. Later, after the forum ended, she stepped outside to air heavy with sun and conversation. 2 women approached her, one in her 60s, the other barely 20. The older one said she had lived in Copper Oaks since the year Brielle was born. "I never thought I'd see the day we had this kind of meeting," she said. The younger one just smiled. "You made this happen." Brielle shook her head gently. "No. We all did. I just refused to let it be invisible." That night, Camille made dinner, spicy jollof and grilled chicken, and the cousins sat on their balcony like they had that first week. The air smelled like fresh rain and second chances. "You proud of yourself?" Camille asked. Brielle looked out over the complex. Lights on. Music playing softly from one unit. A couple laughing by the pool, feet dangling in the water. "No," she said. "I'm relieved. But I'm not done." Camille raised her glass. "To not being done." They clinked quietly. A few days later, the Marietta City Council passed a new ordinance requiring all HOA-related police calls to be documented with specifics, no more vague descriptions. The city also launched a training initiative in collaboration with Justice in Place, titled, "Presence is Not a Crime," using Brielle's case as a teaching example. Brielle never asked for her name to be attached. But when they offered, she said yes. Because sometimes, you don't choose to be the story. Sometimes the story chooses you. And when it does, the only thing that matters is what you do with it. If this story hit something in you, if it reminded you of your cousin, your neighbor, or maybe even yourself, don't just keep scrolling. Talk about it. Don't wait for another headline. Bring it up in your group chats. Ask your people why we still have to prove we belong in the places we already live. This wasn't about a pool. It never is. It's about what happens when someone quietly decides, you don't look like you fit. And what happens when we don't speak up, because it's easier to pretend we didn't see it. But if you saw this story, if you felt this story, then you're part of it now. Share it. Let it start a real conversation. Not just about Brielle, but about your own street, your own silence, your own choices. And if you want more stories like this, real ones, raw ones, the kind nobody's paying millions to tell, then support the voices that are telling them anyway. Click like, subscribe, drop your truth in the comments. Even if it's messy, even if it makes you uncomfortable,